It's been a pretty busy 2015. Recently I did presentations and workshops at Stanford University and CalArts LA. Also participated in an exhibition in Seoul at the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. It was an exhibition of Australian and Korean artists, and as part of that I did a 4-hour performance with my extended arm, which was pretty physically difficult for me. I did a performance titled Propel, Body on Robot Arm, where the artist was coupled to the end of an industrial robot arm whose task envelope was 3 meters in diameter. The robot choreographed the body's trajectory, velocity, position, orientation in the space. And yeah, this was a pretty difficult performance to pull off because of the perceived danger of connecting the body directly to the industrial robot arm. We did the programming offline using the 3D model and simulation software, and then when I was satisfied with the programming, we then transferred it to the robot controller. In fact, the people at the company would only allow me the use of the robot if one of their programmers always had their thumb on the kill switch of the controller. After the performance with my body on the robot, my body was replaced with a body scaled sculpture of my ear. And what was interesting was that the robot that choreographs the movements of this ear on the industrial robot arm was also the robot that carved the sculpture of the ear, because effectively it was a 6 degree of freedom CNC machine as well. So this performance was originally part of the demonstrable exhibition at the Lawrence Wilson Gallery in Perth, and originally it was supposed to be actually performed inside the gallery, but because the structural analysis of the gallery's concrete floor showed that it couldn't support the weight of the 2.5-ton robot and the weight of the forklift that would have been needed to position the robot, in the end the performance was done at the company where the robot was located, and with a small selected group of people who came to witness the performance. Audience reaction's always been kind of problematic, and it's the full spectrum really, of sometimes people being amazed, bewildered, bemused. Sometimes people are curious about the technology, sometimes about overcoming the physical difficulty. So really it's that whole variation of audience reaction that's interesting. But you know, these performances are not essentially structured for an audience, so a lot of the performances have been done with either no audience at all or very few people that have been told about what was going on. So it's never really been a problem for the artist as to what the audience reaction has been. Well, the media tends to kind of tends to be more interested with the spectacular or the sensational or the unusual aspects of the work, which, you know, is understandable because the media wants to present even art as sort of newsworthy, which means it has to be involved with the unusual. Sometimes you get more in-depth journalistic reporting of what's happened, but typically the news stories don't really care much about the aesthetic or conceptual underpinnings of what you do. I think you'd have to say that museums, art institutions, the Arts Council have a different approach to artistic projects that involve technology. I mean, in 1980, when the third hand was engineered and I first performed with it, I couldn't get funding for any of those activities at the time. And also often the problem was that if you tried to get funding from an arts council, they would say, well, it's more to do with engineering and science, why don't you apply to one of those funding bodies? And you would apply to a science body, and they would say, well, it's kind of more about art, so you'd get funding from neither. But that's typical these days. These projects and performances are seen or contextualized within the kind of sci-art paradigm. So there is a sort of a genre of artwork now that employs robotics or medical imaging or the internet or other kinds of machines and scientific instrumentation to produce art with. I'm always hesitant about being seen in that paradigm of art science, because often it's called research within institutions. Institutions like universities don't know what to do with arts practice, so they want to authenticate what you're doing, so they call it research, and they're happier with you publishing a paper or editing a book rather than doing an exhibition or a performance. Well, it's you can't pinpoint one particular source of inspiration. I mean, you have to realise that the projects and performances of mine initially explored the physical and psychological limitations of the body, and these were done in various ways: sensory deprivation performances, physically difficult performances. The performance I did immediately before the first suspension event involved stitching my lips together with surgical needle and thread by myself, 2 hooks into my back, being tethered to the gallery wall for a week, without drinking, without eating, without speaking, without seeing, because I also stitched my eyelids shut. So that was, it happened incrementally over a period of differing performances that explored embodiment, agency, identity. And the first suspension performances used ropes and harnesses to position the body in space, in various locations, in different positions, and so on. But visually that looked very cluttered, and and I became aware of the piercing rituals in Hindu Indian tradition. And when I saw that, I thought, well, this would be really interesting to suspend the body in this way, because then the skin would be part of the support structure. It would be a much more elegant, albeit more physically difficult way of suspending the body. And that began really a series of suspension events over a period of 19, 20 years, where the body was suspended in different locations, in different positions, in different circumstances, indoors, outdoors, some very high suspensions. But there was always this oscillation between the biological experience, the technological augmentation, and managing data streams in virtual systems. So this kind of construct of the body as meat, metal, and code. There's always been this sort of oscillation between those concerns. So it's not just, one direction. It's not just one source of inspiration. It was this complex interactivity between those kinds of concerns of the body being an evolutionary architecture, of realizing its obsolescence in these physically stressful earlier performances, the probing of the body using medical endoscopes, the realization of the body being as much one of hollow spaces as biological structures. So all of these things kind of come together and influence the direction that I've taken as an artist. Well, I've always been interested in the notion of zero gene, and I guess the idea of experiencing that gravitationless space, would be intriguing. I did try to go on a microgravity flight, which didn't happen. I did earlier on write to NASA insisting that an artist should be included in some of their early space station flights. But the body in space is essentially a different concept than the body suspended in a 1G gravitational field. You couldn't be suspended in space in 0G anyway, in that sense. And anyway, you'd have to be a part of this sort of machinery of space technologies to even have that opportunity. So you do what you can with what you've got in the circumstances that you're now in, and you try to push the boundaries, but you can't push all boundaries, and you can't experience all the things that you'd like to.